Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. With the transfer portal, largely winding down, Dill. It's about that time we start handing out the transfer portal report cards going on to the Texas A&M Aggies. And for those who've been listening for the last couple of weeks and really months at this point, you guys know that both of the boys are extremely high on what Mike Elko was able to do in the transfer portal. And Dill, one of the kind of myths that I want to dispel is that this Texas A&M team lost a ton of production to the transfer portal. I think they lost two headliners in Walter Nolan, Evan Stewart. Obviously, those guys you felt really good about. Those ones stung to lose. But, I don't think Texas A&M fans are losing sleep over losing guys like LT Overton. I think Mike Elko did a much better job than most people realize at retaining a lot of the talent from this Texas A&M team. Obviously went out, grabbed 28 transfers, want to get in to the transfer portal grade, talk about some of our favorite things they did, some things we wish they did better. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, the Texas A&M fans. A ton of love, a ton of support you guys have been showing the boys. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, we're going to give you guys some of our favorite transfer portal additions. Would love to hear from you guys in the comments section. Also toss those grades down as well. And Dill, I'm going to kick this one off to you. Before we get into the transfer portal grades, I'll ask you right now, who's your favorite transfer portal addition for this Aggies program?
It's going to be chalky, but it's got to be Nick Skirton. You go back, watch him in Purdue. You go watch the spring game. You're just looking at a guy who might just be an ultra-dominant football player this year. And again, don't get a ton of eyeballs on Purdue so people don't know him. They knew he was highly ranked. We all know he was coming in as a kind of a vaunted transfer addition. But just the way he's dominating, the way he looked in that spring game, I don't know. You already had a really good defensive line, but that's going to be an absolute hammer of a unit.
We've said it. Why am I so high on this Texas A&M team heading into 2024? It starts with this defensive line. And when you have an elite defensive line, which I think certainly Texas A&M is going to have, it makes playing defense so much easier, right? When you have the ability to stop the run, something that Nick Skirton is very good at, and then the best pass rusher in the Big Ten last year, it gets easy to play really good defense in the SEC. I love it. Nick Skirton, by far the best transfer portal addition. Dill, my favorite transfer portal addition is actually going to come from the spring window, and I'm going to go to Solomon DeShields. I thought this was a really big question mark for Texas A&M, and although, he's not the caliber of player Nick Skirton is, I think it was a massive need for Texas A&M. I think they grabbed Alex Howard from Youngstown State. That seemingly didn't go so well. He already hit the portal again. I think he ended up at Duke. I think there was a big question mark about who was going to be the running mate for a guy like Torian York. What does Mike Elko go out and get done? One of the more experienced linebackers that you saw in the portal. And again,
and I think what's big about that is that you can get Scooby Williams in a spot that's a little more conducive to his game. Because I don't know, you watch Florida, you watch that spring game, just doesn't feel wildly comfortable as that true off-ball linebacker to kind of run with Torian York. You bring in DeShields, very comfortable there, can play even a little bit in that nickel role almost. You see him playing at Pitt. So a guy who can play that off-ball linebacker role at a high level and give some more versatility. And again, allow Scooby Williams to play a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage where I think he's just
you mentioned one, totally agree with Scooby Williams. He was recruited as an edge rusher. I think he's better at kind of being more of that edge rusher kind of guy, more of a chess piece in that Texas A&M defense as opposed to, just that off-ball linebacker. You noted it was Solomon DeShields. This is a guy that can rush off the edge, can operate in space and zone coverage, really, really just polished up linebacker, which that's exactly what Texas A&M needed. Now, Dill, let's get into, some of the things that we liked about this Texas A&M class. We noted the defensive line. I would add Cassius Howell as one of those guys that, a little bit of a different flavor than Nick Skirton. Ton of juice coming off the edge. He is going to test tackles athletically with some of that juice he has coming off. But another thing that I think Texas A&M did a really good job of is targeting the specific position groups that they needed to improve on, right? And one of those was the secondary, right? That was the unit that we had a ton of question marks heading into 2024. We're sitting here early May with some of the additions that they made and said, this unit, I have a ton of confidence in heading into 2024. And I think why I'm so high on that is That's how the portal should be used, right? You don't want to just grab guys to grab guys. You want to make sure you're targeting the specific positions you kind of want to reinforce heading into a fall. I think Texas A&M absolutely did that, knocked it out of the park with the secondary, very high in the secondary heading into 2024 here.
And you know what else they were able to do? Grab a couple more young guys in the portal, guys like Des Ricks who can develop through, but also being able to retain some of their better young secondary guys like Dalton Brooks. I'm very confident moving forward with. I think they can do a lot with him if they can coach him up correctly. Same thing with Javen Thomas. So to be able to retain some of your more high-level guys that I think have more promising potential, and you had to push some guys out probably in that room because it wasn't very good last year. I don't think it was a particularly well-coached unit. But again, being able to add the veterans who can allow you to win now, they obviously did that, but also be able to retain those kind of young building blocks in that portal class. I think that's a huge underrated thing. And you kind of even hear coaches starting to talk about it like the way Brian Kelly is. It's like you don't want to run guys out. You don't want to make yourself just a revolving doors of transfers in and out. Like you want to be able to add transfers when you can find value and help your team. But again, you want to be able to keep your young guys. And I think Mike Elko and his staff did a better job than a lot of people think retaining some of those young guys with promise.
I totally agree. And you see a lot of programs, Colorado probably being the one that you think of, we're just going to grab as many guys as we can. What happens? You start losing some really good players too. I mean, Texas A&M grabbed 28 transfers, and yeah, they lost some guys, but I think that had a lot more to do with the coaching change than anything else. I mean, they brought in 28 transfers. They didn't lose a ton of those young building blocks. Like you said, I'm kind of with you. I think Texas A&M operated the transfer portal extremely well. Now,
because you can even kick it down to the defensive line and look what they were able to keep keeping guys like DJ Hicks, I should say, keeping guys like Rylan Kennedy, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, like keeping the building block foundations of what they had, adding some pieces for sure. And they needed to add some pieces because you want to win at a higher clip than they were winning last year. But again, the foundation of what they have, it's still very much intact. And that was always going to be hard because Texas A&M had recruited really well. We're pretty loaded for the most part in talent. So Sharks were no doubt circling them, and they were able to keep a good chunk of that young nucleus.
So moving to the things that you didn't like with Texas A&M, I think there's one that's kind of glaring. I think a lot of Texas A&M fans, probably agree with this in the comments section. Just didn't get a difference maker on the offensive line. And there's a couple things to note. One, it's really hard to recruit the offensive line in the portal. And that's why we stress so much. And you've seen Mike Elko already bring in, I think, 3 committed offensive linemen in the 2025 class. You take a look at the available offensive linemen in the portal, Dill. We were talking about this before we went live. It's
maybe 3 guys, maybe 3 difference makers on that offense.
There's just not there. Yeah, there's not many of them, right? So you have to make sure you're getting it done on the recruiting trail. So if there's one bone to pick with what Texas A&M did in the portal, was probably not getting, kind of a difference maker on the offensive line. You went and got some guys from the group of 5. I think you look at them and say, I think they're depth pieces. I don't think they're going to start for Texas A&M. So that's probably my one knock. And so I'll get onto it and give you guys my grade. I'm going to go A-. I think you did a lot of good things. I think you brought in a lot of good players at a lot of different positions of need while also kind of maintaining that young nucleus. If you would have grabbed a guy like Lance Hurd, I probably would give it an A, maybe even an A+. But because I don't think they addressed the offensive line, I'm going to give it an A-. Dill, what's your report card grade for Texas A&M?
Yeah, I might go a little lower and maybe just sit it at a B+, just because, again, I mean, when you can't kind of fix that one hole that's really going to feel like it's going to be the kind of make or break for this A&M team, because I look everywhere else they can win at. Like that wide receiver spot, I know they didn't really do a ton to do it, especially in the spring portal when they kind of said they were going for guys. But I look, that unit is fine. Added a bunch of guys in the winter. I think that unit's going to be really good. It's just when you have a glaring hole, which does feel like that offensive line's still kind of there, it's hard to, and again, I don't even know if it's their fault, but it's hard to say the portal is totally used in.
We're going to blame Coach Adazio. We're going to blame Jimbo Fisher for
it. And that's the hard part, because again, you didn't really have a ton of choices, but I mean, you probably almost needed to land one of those big time guys.
I guess to close it out on the offensive line, because again, we've been very vocal. That's the big storyline for this program. Like if this offensive line figures it out in 2024, this is an extremely dangerous team. I think a lot of Texas A&M fans are just fired up for some new coaching on the offensive line, right? Coach Cushing, one of the more proven developers on the offensive line. There's a reason Mike Elko brought him to College Station. You have the talent. Like, a lot of these guys have been mentioned in the NFL draft. They just never have gotten developed over the last couple of years. If you can get that development, maybe Texas A&M didn't need to go out and address it in the transfer portal as much as they did. Although in the spring game, it didn't look
questionable. It didn't look incredibly good. It still looks like you want, kind of those cornerstone pieces. And again, it was going to be always really, really hard to land them. But at the end of the day,
you're being stingy with the grades. And I think the Texas A&M fans should let you have in the comment section, because I don't know what Mike Elko was supposed to do with the offensive line, because we just looked through it. I think there were maybe 4 guys that would come in and start for Texas A&M that were available in the portal.
Frankly, an argument against me is they kept their young guys, keeping guys like Basantis and some of those other young guys that they've been able to recruit. And if they can develop them, then like I'll have egg on my face. I'll live with that. But as of right now, it's still such a monster question. It's hard to give that kind of like flying colors grade. That's kind of where I'm at.
Hard TA. I don't want to have you as my teacher when I'm going to grad school. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. That'll do it for the fellas. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Appreciate y'all rocking with it, and we'll talk to y'all later.